Hey everyone, welcome back and thanks for your time. The election here in the US this past Tuesday, November 5th, is a big deal and could have big implications when President Trump retakes office in January. It's still a little early to draw conclusions about the future for Artemis, and in the meantime, I'm going to try to catch up on pre-election news. In this video, I'll recap a recent interview I did to get an update on the status of different aspects of SLS Core Stage production. There are also a few news and notes besides the election to go over. I've reported on a few parts of the interview with NASA SLS Stages manager Steve Wofford in the last update. I interviewed Mr. Wofford on October 24th for a NASA spaceflight story and for this podcast. The NSS story was published on Thursday, November 7th. There's a link up there, and I'll also put it in the description. The SLS Stages Element is responsible for the core stage of the vehicle. We can see on this organizational chart that the NASA Inspector General Office put together for one of their reports how SLS Stages fits into the overall Space Launch System program. I've interviewed Mr. Wofford multiple times, although much more prior to the COVID pandemic. One of the interesting things is that he has managed 3 of the Element offices. First, the Liquid Engines Office, which manages both of the Aerojet Rocketdyne engines used by SLS, the RS-25 and the RL-10. More recently, he was the manager of the Block 1B and Exploration Upper Stage Development Office. And now he has started in that position at the head of the Stages Office. I started the interview asking about plans for production of other heritage space shuttle hardware. SLS famously and obviously uses solid rocket booster and main engine hardware that flew on multiple space shuttle launches with some modifications. However, like the RS-25 engines, which were flight-proven shuttle parts, the core stage employs other Heritage Shuttle Main Propulsion System or MPS hardware. In particular, shuttle hydraulic system parts are used, such as modified auxiliary power units, but also quote-unquote direct reuse parts with fewer modifications, such as the hydraulic thrust vector control or TVC actuators and the hydraulic circulation pumps. I'd heard a little bit about that effort in October 2023 during a factory visit for NASA spaceflight, but there wasn't time to follow up during a general tour of the main factory floor at Michoud in mid-July. So I started by asking about the status of that effort. Do you have a sense of the status of, first, is there a cutoff between where you run out of shuttle parts and need to start doing all new build parts, and then just also kind of the status of where you are with certifying the new suppliers and the new production for all of that?
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag, Philip. So I don't have a cut-in point for everything. It's different across different hardware. So what we obviously do is we use everything we have, right? If you got good heritage hardware sitting on the shelf, then you want to go use it until that supply is exhausted. So I'll kind of run down for you where we stand on that stuff. So the improved CAPU, what we call the ICAPU, I standing for improved, is going to phase in on Core Stage 4. So we've got Collins Aerospace on board to make that under contract for Boeing, and they're progressing well with the design and performing piece part subcomponent level dev testing and analysis. We also have other new production components like the circulation pump and the actuators and the iCAPU controller that are progressing through their designs, and they're on track to support the production need dates. It is development, so there is some risk in those schedules, but right now the schedules are holding with some risk being kept. You ask about the MPS and the TVC components. So except for the main pump, we've got inventory through Core Stage 6 for that. So we've got suppliers on board and designing and manufacturing and testing those replacement hardwares. Moog is on board building us the new actuators. And we have a proposed design for the new main pump for Core Stage 7. but we don't have a supplier on board for that just yet.
But you have in terms of actual sort of parts on hand, you're okay for obviously you'll need some set of or some amount of spares for like the third one and even the second one. I'm sure you're going to be I know they were talking about for, between the first and the second, if you needed a spare part, you could pull it off the next one in line. But you have spares for right. The next couple of builds down the, downstream.
At least the next one. So you don't want to have to do that because it perturbs the build flow for the unit that you take it off of. But yes, the short answer to your question is yes. So we've exhausted, going back to your question on have you used up all the hardware, we've exhausted the shuttle inventory of actuators and circ pumps on Core Stage 1 and 2. But we still have shuttle heritage CAPUs through Core Stage 3 and hydraulic main pumps through 6.
And have you been able to get the recirculation pumps for the hydraulic recirculation pumps for 3? Are those? I mean, I know I'd asked Boeing a little while ago just to get kind of a big picture on the engine section about the TVC platforms, and I don't know whether those necessarily go in completely built up, but I assume that do you have the recirculation pumps already installed in the engine section down at the Cape?
No.
Okay.
So for 3, the recirc pumps are in work.
Okay.
So I don't know at what point in the flow those do get installed, but we're working on those.
The main pump is actually a solid rocket booster hydraulic pump. The shuttle orbiter and SRB hydraulics were similar, and you can see a little bit of the similarity in the TVC actuators in this picture of a display at Marshall Space Flight Center. In the shuttle orbiter, it was called the auxiliary power unit, and it is called the hydraulic power unit in the booster. Both those were and are driven by a hydrazine gas generator. The hydrazine elements were removed from the core stage, so the core auxiliary power unit, or CAPU, is driven by tapped-off gaseous hydrogen from the stage's autogenous repressurization system during RS-25 engine main stage. Prior to engine start, the CAPU is driven by a ground-based gaseous helium spin start system. This paper on the design of the core stage TVC system, which can be found on the NASA Technical Report server, enumerates the hydraulic system components, which ones are directly reused from shuttle, and all the new hardware. Most of the systems, including other MPS hardware, were newly developed for the SLS Core Stage, including all new avionics. I'll include a link to the NTRS landing page for that paper in the description. So, beginning with Core Stage 3, prime contractor Boeing will need a fresh supply of the TVC actuators and hydraulic recirculation pumps before they can finish standalone integration of the engine section. Like the RS-25 production restart, generally speaking, restarting production of these stage MPS components has to be recertified, so those 2 hydraulic system elements will need to go through that effort before Artemis 3 launches. Next, I asked about the production status itself for Core Stage 3, beginning with the top 4/5 of the unit that are still being assembled at MAF in New Orleans.
I can tell you where we stand with the TPS spray on the hydrogen tank. We've been down. We've lost a little bit of time on that due to a tooling issue on the rotation apparatus in that cell at MAF, and those repairs are underway. So they've held us up on that, but we're working on that pretty hot and heavy, and we hope to get into that really soon. The LH2 tank is, as far as MAF hardware goes on Core Stage 3, the LH2 tank is my critical path. Of course, the engine section is always the overall critical path, but due to that tooling issue, LH2 tank is my MAF critical path now.
That's a change in the big picture for the build, at least from previous. The 2 propellant tanks were kind of trailing in the build since they are the least complicated elements. The liquid hydrogen tank was originally planned for the first core stage, but was set aside in 2017 due to welds that needed to be repaired. It was ahead of the liquid oxygen tank in the production process, but the issue with the rotation system in Cell N has delayed spraying the tank with its thermal protection system foam insulation. A special formulation of the foam is used for the robotic sprays in Cell N. The tanks are heated inside so that the foam is applied at a specific substrate temperature, and the control system for that is integrated with the rotational tools that the tanks are installed in to coordinate the application rate of the spray with the rotation rate of the tools. We just got pictures of the tank that were taken when it was originally moved into Cell N back on May 20th. The pictures were released on November 1st, and the tank still hadn't received its SOFI sprays by the end of October, so that work has been delayed for a while. In the meantime, the LOX tank could soon be headed into Cell P for its primer coat, and then it would have to wait for Cell N availability. Those tanks can't be joined to the other two parts of the stage until after the SOFI sprays are completed. I followed that with the big picture question about the roadmap for the build. Can you give me a sense of what you're shooting for in terms of getting the whole 4/5 put together and then shipping it to Kennedy?
Let me give you some seasonal milestones, okay?
Sure.
So the hydrogen tank aft join, we're currently forecasting to finish that in early summer of 2025.
Right.
So the top 4/5 will be completed in late summer following that. The forward join is scheduled to complete also in mid-summer. And then that puts our estimated ship date for the top 4/5 from MAF to KSC in late summer of 25. And then at KSC, we've joined the engine section and the boat tail already for Core Stage 3. We're down a couple of weeks because of the hurricane, so we lost 2 solid weeks on the hurricane. We didn't have any hardware damage or any facility damage, but it takes several days to secure for the hurricane. Then you're down for a couple of days when the hurricane's doing its thing, and then it takes you a couple of days to clean up and resume operations, and then you turn around and you're down 2 weeks. So we lost a couple of weeks there. We're currently scheduled to move the combined engine section boat tail to the VAB in July of next year, and then handover in DD250 to EGS will be December of 2025.
DD250 refers to DD Form 250, which is a government form that NASA takes when it receives materials. It's another way of referring to when Boeing hands over the completed stage to Exploration Ground Systems. Something similar happened recently with Core Stage 2 when it was delivered to KSC from New Orleans. Going forward, Boeing's final assembly of the stage will occur in High Bay 2 of the VAB, and it would be formally handed over either there or when it was time to mate the stage to the boosters for a given launch. So putting all of that together, NASA and Boeing are still targeting completion of the stage by the end of 2025. These forecast dates to finish the standalone engine section early next summer, then the 4/5 by the end of the summer, and then the whole stage in a little more than a year will be challenging, and maybe 2026 is more realistic. That official need date of the end of 2025 might change in the meantime too, depending on when the target launch date for Artemis 3 is revisited, given the wide expectation that it will eventually be delayed again. The next topic was the status of the Core Stage 4 build. The information that I had, I think you had both propellant tanks needed to be welded in the VAC, and then, if I recall correctly, the forward skirt still needed its rings. Do you have a sense of what's the plan to get those through the VAC and then let them progress through the rest of the production?
Well, let me give you the schedules that we're shooting for, and then I'll talk a little bit about trying to choreograph that dance. So the hydrogen tank for Core Stage 4 is scheduled to complete its weld in the VAC in December of this year. And then the LOX tank is planned to finish welding in spring of 25. Now, we've got a good problem in that we had a lot of hardware being crammed through one factory, right? But it's a problem, but it's a good problem to have. So we've got 2 core stages in progress down there right now, and we've got EUS-1. So 3 major flight articles on 2 product lines cramming through the same set of assets. So we've got to figure that out. So Boeing's got a good factory model that we are working through runs with them now to figure out exactly when you do what through the various cells and on the various tools. So we haven't got that pinned down exactly yet, but these schedules are holding as of yet.
Has the intertank for 4 moved into the TPS cell to do that, or is it sort of still being? It's again sort of a traffic pattern in terms of when the availability of the different cells and tools.
Yeah, it's planned to move into cell G at the end of the year.
Okay.
December.
Okay, and then for the boat tail, we saw, again, just looking at pictures kind of in the background. We saw it. I was actually kind of surprised to see how far along the assembly was.
Yeah.
Will that go? What's the plan to finish that? And is it just going to ship by itself to KSC? It does not take up that much room on the barge, but when's that plan to go to KSC?
Early 2026. So plan to ship to KSC and then made it with the engine section in early 2026.
In terms of the going, this would be down the road a little bit, but what's the forecast for the getting the 4 fits completed and shipping to KSC, and then I can come back to maybe intermediate milestones?
Top 4 fits is planned to ship in summer of 2026, okay. Followed by DD250 in the fall.
Looking at that information, the target of finishing the build in the fall of 2026 is ambitious and would essentially be a year after a similarly ambitious target for the 3rd core stage. Some of that will depend on when Core Stage 3 progresses into its major joins, because right now the forward skirt and inner tank for that build occupy the integration tools. The target is to finish welding the structures for the 4th stage unit by next spring, and then they would have a little more than a year to finish and join them all together. In a follow-up, Marshall Space Flight Center Public Affairs said that welding the 2 L rings to the top and bottom of the forward skirt barrel in the Vertical Assembly Center tool was planned for this month, November. So then the LH2 tank would go through the VAC by the end of the year, and then the LOX tank next spring. Presumably, that allows for EUS structural test article traffic and maybe first flight article traffic in between. And in the meantime, the engine section for Core Stage 4 has about a year and a half to complete integration at KSC and be ready to connect to the rest of the stage in the VAB there. I went over the question about VAB High Bay 2 at Kennedy Space Center and using the new tooling to finish some traveled work on Core Stage 2 in the last update. But the other question for Mr. Wofford in the time I had was about beginning production of Core Stage 5. That's not as straightforward because production is not currently covered by a production contract, which I noted in asking the question. One of the things for the history of the current contract, which is the stages, what is it, production and evolution contract. It went through a whole sort of period of time where there were a lot of undefinitized contract actions, and then it was finalized. But I know there was supposed to be a handover to the Epoch contract, and obviously we haven't heard anything about that. So is that what work on Core Stage 5 basically is getting tagged on to the spec contract under a sort of undefinitized work?
Yeah, so let me tell you what we're doing on that. It's a good question, and it's a fair inbounds question. So Epoch is still under study by NASA headquarters. Spec is for core stages 3 and 4. So your question is, what are you doing about core stage 5? And you ask an astute question, and the answer is along the lines of what you were getting at. So we're using IDIQ task order. Do you know what IDIQ is?
I'm familiar with it, but if you can give me the elevator pitch version of it, that would be great.
Okay. So for the benefit of your readers and listeners, so IDIQ stands for indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. So what that means is it's a expedited way that you can get an existing contractor on board for additional goods or services that the need has arisen for. So you set up a big contract, and then you have a provision in the contract for indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. That's future stuff that you can't totally nail down at the time when you let the contract, but it's a shortcut way of putting new stuff on contract when the need and the definition arises. So then all you have to do is agree on the scope and the price of the work. So we're getting core stage 5 production on board with a task order IDIQ approach. So core stage 5 production is not part of the spec contract, but we're buying long lead parts for core stage 5 and long lead materials for core stage 6 under spec IDIQ. How was that?
That was good.
Just a little bit confusing.
Yeah, well, yeah.
We're using what we have to not delay, right?
Right.
It's important. This stuff takes a long time to build, so we're using the existing contract structure that we have, working with our procurement partners to get the stuff that we need on contract to where we don't have to rush so much.
I followed up with public affairs and found out that basically the authority to proceed contract actions occurred at the beginning of fiscal year 2025, but actual production is not expected to begin until the first quarter of the calendar year. For reference, the engine section barrel welding for core stage 3 was done at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, and for core stage 4 in the middle of 2022. So this 5th flight engine section barrel would be about 2.5 to 3 years behind the 4th unit, compared to 1.5 years between the 3rd and 4th unit. When Boeing first told me that NASA had quote-unquote turned on the contract actions for engine section production, I noted that production was expected to take 36 months by the time that the initial annual delivery rate of 1 unit per year was reached. If Boeing can reach that rate by the time this 5th build is complete, then this core stage 5 build would project out to a completion and delivery in 2028. That might be as ambitious as the plans for these next 2 units, core stage 3 and 4, but it's also possible that NASA will not need core stage 5 for a while after 2028. As it stands, core stage 5 is assigned to Artemis 5, which is not planned to launch until 2030. In news and notes for the week, the re-election of President Trump casts a long shadow, in particular due to Elon Musk. Neither of them really need introductions, but it's worth pointing out that Musk became a significant member of Trump's campaign in this 2024 election cycle, and is expected to play a significant role in the transition that is beginning now and the administration that begins on January 20th. That's due to many comments that were made over the past several weeks, but details and plans are still being considered, and it's only been a few days since Trump won the election. There are a lot of post-election questions that are accumulating about the possible implications for NASA and Artemis in particular, but I'm going to give things a week or so post-election before trying to address this. On Wednesday, November 6th, SpaceX announced plans to launch the 6th Starship flight test as soon as November 18th. I'll return to this too, but there are a couple of things to note now and return to them again later. First, SpaceX plans to attempt an on-orbit Raptor restart on the ship on this flight test, which is crucial to orbital flights and orbital flight testing, which is crucial to the Artemis 3 schedule. Second, the announcement also notes that this will be the last flight test of this iteration of the Starship design. The 7th flight test will fly the Block 2 upgrades that SpaceX has been talking about since the springtime. One of those outstanding questions about heritage facilities at Kennedy Space Center is about the status or availability of High Bay 1 in the Vehicle Assembly Building. Since retirement of the Space Shuttle in 2011, the integration cell has pretty much laid dormant. Shuttle-specific work platforms were never removed, and the high bay was occasionally used as a parking place for also obsolete shuttle mobile launch platforms. KSC put out an announcement for proposals a couple of years ago, and it was rumored that a SpaceX bid to utilize the space was tentatively selected. However, in the last 2 years or so, it's been very quiet. There were 3 leftover shuttle MLPs, and since that announcement for proposals, 2 of them were demolished, including the one that was occupying High Bay 1. Given how long it's been quiet, I asked KSC Public Affairs for a status on leasing High Bay 1 to a commercial tenant, and got this update, which was also reported by NSF. It says, quote, NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida released an announcement for proposal in August 2022 for private companies interested in using High Bay 1 of the Vehicle Assembly Building for assembly, integration, and testing of launch vehicles and spacecraft. NASA selected a company and held discussions over several months to define the terms of use, but no agreement was reached and both sides have agreed to cease negotiations. NASA is currently planning for use of High Bay 1 in support of Artemis operations, given the capability to support a versatile array of operations, including assembly, integration, and testing of launch vehicles and spacecraft. Unquote. Crawler Transporter 2, which supports moving SLS mobile launchers from station to station in the Launch Complex 39 area, recently went through a maintenance cycle in High Bay 1 at the beginning of this year. And if NASA plans more active or frequent utilization of the cell for Artemis, it will be something to follow. The shuttle work platforms in High Bay 3 were removed as a part of the conversion from shuttle to SLS, and it's not clear whether the High Bay 1 shuttle platforms would block some types of activities there. Thanks as always for your time. Thanks for watching. Click on the like button if you found this video informative.